Pennsylvania. By drawing the lines for federal and state districts, and even our local wards here in Radnor Township, our elected officials are choosing their voters instead of us as voters choosing them. The League has decades-old positions that call for reform in the process that determines how boundaries are drawn every 10 years based on the census. No one understands this process better than Amanda Holt, my guest today. She is a woman who has, through her own efforts, left an indelible mark on Pennsylvania. While it is wonderful that she is here as a commissioner in Lehigh County, Amanda is renowned for her role in redistricting. The map she created eventually led to an historic victory before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2012. Amanda, I am so happy to have you here in Radnor today. I remember first meeting you in Allentown when you testified before the Legislative Redistricting Commission. While I suspected your map was marvelous, I didn't expect where it would lead you and the voters of Pennsylvania. Can you begin by telling us a little bit about how you got interested in redistricting?
I'm so happy to be here and be able to share with you today. And yes, what led me into the world of redistricting was not what you would maybe expect. It was an interest in puzzles and research and learning about the candidates who are running for office even before I was able to vote. So then in 2010, I was interested in seeing not just what my own ballot looked like, but how the ballot looked for everyone who was voting in the county where I live. And in doing that, I noticed that there were just some odd things going on, some district boundaries that seemed to defy logic. And so I noticed in my congressional district, and I think we have a picture of that, there was a small part of the county that was separated out and put into another congressional district. And I thought, there's only 2,000 voters there. Like, why would they do that? And so answering that why question led me to want to learn all about redistricting.
Well, I'd like to know what you thought when you saw that map created by the Legislative Redistricting Commission in 2011.
It was pretty interesting. So before any maps were drawn, I shared with them what I thought would be a better way to go about drawing maps, that you could comply with the Constitution better than they had in the past by following some of the things that I had found, and had showed that to them, and they had been impressed and promised to consider all the feedback they had heard. So I was very optimistic that we would end up with a different looking map in 2011. So I was surprised when the maps came out and I saw that they didn't seem to incorporate any of that feedback that I had so meticulously submitted to them. But I was undeterred, and so in response, I drew multiple maps showing how the numbers of counties, towns, and wards could be significantly reduced. And I have a chart here that shows the reduction that was possible there. It was over 80% in the Senate, 70% in the House, and at least 60% in congressional districts. So there was a significant room for improvement, let's say.
What is the problem when counties and municipalities and things like that are broken into different legislative districts?
This country was founded by people who are willing to give their lives so residents could have a say in their government. But while they succeeded in ensuring that people had that voice, the way districts are drawn really define how they will be represented. So our voice needs protected because what happens in government really affects our daily lives, like issues we care about, such as maybe education or taxes or the roads and safety. They all mean that we need to care about our representation. So when counties and towns and wards are kept whole, people really see two big benefits from that. And one is that their voice has more significance and strength. They can unify together and really make themselves heard on these issues that they care about. And another way it benefits them is that it is an impartial and natural standard to use these town and county lines. And so that means that it's not going to be a subject to manipulation like partisan or bias when the lines are drawn.
Are there guidelines for drawing boundaries?
There are. In Pennsylvania, there's really two sets of guidelines for how districts are drawn. One for congressional and then one for the state legislative districts. So for congressional, there's really two sets of rules that need to be followed. One is to make sure you have equal population, and the other is to respect minorities. For state districts, there are really 5 key things that need to be considered. I have a list here. One's population, equality, compact, contiguous, counties, towns, and wards to remain whole, and they're also to respect minorities. So these rules are designed to make sure that those drawing the maps just don't do whatever they want to do, that they are limited in their power in drawing district lines, and the rules are there to really promote district boundaries, which are in the best interest of the people.
So given your map and the charts that you have showing that you could make a map with fewer municipalities broken up and the constitutional guidelines, what happened?
Well, when the map drawers came out with their final map, and I think we have a picture of that one as well, they didn't really look that different from what had been done in previous years. And there were still all of these unconstitutional splits in there. So I thought, well, what can I do? I mean, what recourse do I have? So because they hadn't listened to my plea, I was able to take my case to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't know anything about how to do this. But I really felt strongly the law had been violated and somebody needed to stand up and say something. So it happened that a member of the League of Women Voters helped connect me with a lawyer who was willing to work on this case. So eventually 2 law firms were willing to represent me pro bono. One was the Public Interest Law Center in Philadelphia, and the other was Hogan Lovells. So together they represented my case before the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, and the court eventually ruled in my favor. So 491 days after I had begun my redistricting journey, the court released their reason for overturning those maps. And it was primarily because of the evidence I submitted in my petition. And the evidence was a map I had drawn, which we have a picture of here. And my name was mentioned 34 times in the 86-page court opinion. So it was pretty significant.
Wow, your story is remarkable. To think that one person could make such a difference for Pennsylvania and their voters. You know, it really wants me to stand up and cheer, but I won't. However, I know your redistricting reform efforts continue. Do you have any ideas how this process might work?
It is difficult currently to hold those drawing the maps accountable, just because some of the rules are viewed as being a little vague. So I think it could be addressed, that issue could be addressed by making sure we really have some clear and measurable standards that can be used to hold those drawing the maps accountable. I think that where can you have accountability unless you have those measurable standards? And it's of a benefit to everyone. It's an essential starting point really in any reform process. Also, citizen involvement is really important. And I have been working with Draw the Lines PA, and they're a nonpartisan group that are giving students and adults the opportunity to see what it's like to try their hand at drawing a map. So that's another great way for people to see, experience sort of what it's like to draw a map and have an opportunity to do that. And those competitions are going on now. There's one starting soon, so people can feel free to join in on those too.
So they may come up with better maps that may go to the Supreme Court the next time around.
That's right.
I also understand that the governor has recently formed a new commission to reform redistricting, and I heard that you were a part of that.
I am.
Do you know what's going on with that group?
So the governor created a commission to take a closer look at the redistricting issue and what's going on with that. So there are 15 members, 11 that he appointed, and then 4 that were appointed by the legislative leaders. So together we'll research how to improve the fairness and integrity of the redistricting process, including reducing partisan influence. We'll also have an opportunity to try and model really innovative and high quality public engagement through multiple forums. And within a year, we're to present our findings and recommendations to the governor and the legislature.
It would really be great to have these recommendations in place for the 2020 census. And of course, we need accurate data going into the census so that population numbers are accurate. Now, the League is also delighted to have our state president, Susan Carty, who will also be serving on the Governor's Commission to reform redistricting. And I understand your director for that effort will be Dick Thornburg, who is the head of the watchdog group, the Committee of 70. Now, speaking of watchdogs, Amanda, you had a unique position in Radnor Township several years ago. You were watching how the wards were being drawn in Radnor and were a part of that process. Does the drawing of our local wards and boundaries, like those in Radnor Township, impact what's happening at the state and federal levels too?
It certainly can have an impact, because any time a township is split into wards or voting districts, the state legislators can use that as an opportunity to split that township along those lines and making the state districts or the congressional districts. So it is pretty significant how they're drawn.
What exactly did you do in Radnor when you were here?
Radnor Township hired me to help them redraw their ward boundaries back in 2014, and we have a picture of what those ward boundaries looked like at that time.
And so then what did you do after you saw the boundaries that were existing?
Well, they asked me to really look into those and see sort of what the rules were that they needed to comply with. So there were at least 6 rules which have to be followed in, redrawing the ward boundaries, and I have a list of them here. They come from the federal, state, and county governments. So they have to be approximately equal population. There should be no discrimination against minorities. They can't change legislative and congressional boundaries. They need clearly visible physical features like a road or a stream or some kind of boundary marker. The census block lines must be followed. And then the voting precincts where you go vote, they may not be changed. They can't change how the state district boundaries are. So some of the rules conflicted with each other, so it made it a little challenging when we had to go figure out how to redraw the ward boundaries. For instance, some of the voting districts didn't seem to have really clear boundary lines to them. So that was something we had to work through together.
So, you think this process, when you worked on it, could have been improved? You said you had to work on clarifying some of the rules that seemed to be conflicting. Were there other issues that you had to deal with in this process?
They really had, the commissioners, when they were drawing or having me draw the maps for them, they really had some key issues to wrestle with. They had to think about, well, could all the wards be in one state house district? Or how could neighborhoods be kept together? And how should universities be treated in the process? And what happens when a census block splits a neighborhood? So I think there was certainly opportunities for improvement. If I had to narrow it down, I would say there were 3, really to prepare, prioritize, and promote. So to prepare for the census now by reviewing those census block boundaries.
What is a census block?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand myself.
So when they go take the census, the very smallest group that people are sort of lumped into, the smallest geographic area, they call them a census block. So there's something the Census Bureau makes up, and they draw all these little census block lines. And so for counting people, they count people within each of these census blocks. And those census blocks make up voting districts, which make up wards, which make up, hopefully, townships and counties and that kind of thing. So that's sort of where it all begins.
So if the census blocks aren't right in the first place, it creates a snowballing kind of effect.
It certainly does, especially when you get down to the real local level. They really feel it when you're trying to redraw your voting precincts or your ward boundaries. Those become much more significant then.
So those census blocks must be intact. So even if I'm your neighbor, if I'm in one census block and you're in another, we may be in different wards.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's important to prepare, and that's something you have to kind of look at before they get too far along in the census to make sure that those are the way they should be. So that's why you need to prepare. And then to prioritize, you need to prioritize which rules and guidelines should be followed in creating the wards and the other boundaries. And then also to promote public trust in the process through greater transparency. That's important as well.
Were the meetings you held in Radnor, were they open to the public? Do you know?
Sometimes I met with a committee, and the public, I don't recall being at those meetings. And then eventually they did release the map that they were considering to the public, and then those were held in public meetings.
And did they keep notes and things of the meetings? Did they have minutes and things, or was it just mostly a discussion when you had them?
It was just a discussion. I didn't see any minutes being kept.
So they would discuss things, and then you would follow up with a map.
Yes.
And that would be the next step for the next discussion.
So in the end, there were probably, I think, 12 different versions of the map that we had come up with. And then they finally selected one to present that was the final map. And I think we have a picture of what those final wards looked like that we can show here, of what they look like today.
So there were like many steps to go from where they used to be to the current ward map, which you are showing now.
Yes.
Wow. Well, as you know, the League of Women Voters believes that apportionment and redistricting should be based substantially on populations of all voting districts, with additional considerations, as you've mentioned, for compactness so that they hang together. You don't see pieces sticking out on a map. And that you need to respect given municipal boundaries. Having neighborhoods have their voices impacted needs to be monitored closely. And it's our hope, as well as yours, that proceedings involving such processes are open and transparent. I often hear people saying, one voice, equal voice, equal vote. Are you optimistic that this will actually happen, that we'll be able to improve redistricting so that everyone's voice is heard equally?
Well, the legislature must continue to ask itself, how do they restore public trust and integrity to the redistricting process? So I continue to be hopeful that that will happen, that they will be responsive to the concerns raised and will find ways to improve the redistricting process before the next redistricting cycle. I really do believe it's in the best interest of both the legislature to do that and the people that they're representing to have that improvement take place. But if I wasn't at least a little optimistic, I probably would have given up a long time ago. So redistricting happens at all levels of government, as you well know here in Radnor Township. And it is important to not only watch what happens at the state level, but also pay attention to how redistricting works in your local area and in your local government. So from the time of our founding, it was citizens participating in their government that made for a better government. They did not begin as experts in government, but were willing to learn and be persistent. So my story, I think, shows how remarkable things can happen when just ordinary citizens have that persistence and determination, and that the voice of each person really does matter.
And I think it's important to also underscore the need to have good numbers for that census, because without good numbers for that census, which every person can participate in, we won't have the right information to make good decisions about where the wards are, where the municipalities are split, where the districts form at the state level and at the federal level.
Yeah, the districts, the census taking is certainly a very significant first step in this whole redistricting process.
And that's starting soon.
It is, very soon.
So, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and the viewers on Radnor Studio 21. We are indeed grateful for the studio's support of the League of Women Voters and our efforts to help citizens understand the importance of drawing boundary lines that impacts our votes and our voice. I am certain that our audience concurs that you deserve being named the 2012 Citizen of the Year for the Patriots News, and were the recipient of the AAUW's Impact Award. You also received the 2014 Public Service Achievement Award for Common Cause for your work in redistricting. We wish you well in your role on Pennsylvania's Redistricting Reform Commission as you and the League strive to make a difference in helping to make democracy work. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township, I again wish to express my appreciation to Radnor Studio 21 for the opportunity to explore this important issue with you today. We hope you will continue to watch as we provide a series of shows, redistricting, gerrymandering, it's local, and drawing the boundaries that affect our township. A fair process is fundamental to promoting good government at all levels. Keep watching, keep learning. One person, Amanda Holt, made a difference. You can too. Thank you.